So now that we understand how to work with different watercolor layers and also work with the liquid ink layers, we need to understand how to work with these and be able to use other tools on these layers without actually flattening the document. Because remember when I showed you before, and I'll just turn on this watercolor layer now so that you can see it again, is that in order to be able to paint with any other tools on top of this, we really only have the one option, which is to flatten this down. Now, we do have another option, which is to take a regular layer, place it above the layers that are underneath, and then go in there with something like, say, our pencil tool. So I'll just grab the pencil tool, grab the 2B pencil, and we'll go ahead and make some pencil marks on top of that. And that will give you, to a certain degree, a certain amount of the effect of having this pencil on top of the liquid ink and on top of the watercolor. However, you start to have a lot of layers, starts to get confusing, or maybe you want to work directly into the watercolor or directly into the liquid ink layer. Well, obviously, having another layer above there is not necessarily the correct answer. So what we need to do is we need to make use of a command. Now, the command will not be over here in the layers menu item. This menu item is fairly comprehensive, and if we want to just sort of quickly review, there's a new layer, there's a new watercolor layer, there's a new liquid ink layer, and then we have convert to reference layer. This is something we'll come back to at another time. And then we have duplicate layer. Well, obviously that just duplicates whatever type of layer contents you have going on the layer that you have currently selected. Then we have layer attributes. This is the same as double clicking on a layer and then working with the attributes. Move to bottom, move to top, move down one layer, and move up one layer. Those are all the same as what you get over here with our layer adjuster. Select all layers and group layers. We'll come back to these in a little bit. And the drop all was the one I was talking about before, where we flatten everything down to the canvas. And we'll come back to layer masks later on. And then we have lift canvas to watercolor layer, wet entire watercolor layer, dry watercolor layer, dry digital watercolor, diffuse digital watercolor. And we've covered all those in previous videos. And dynamic plugins we're not going to cover here. These are basically just certain types of filter effects that you can look at on your own time. So that's pretty much a quick review of the layers menu item. But we also have in this flyout menu a whole bunch of the same types of commands. You see we have new layer, new watercolor layer, and new liquid ink layer. We also have convert to reference layer, but here we have one that we didn't have in the layers menu item, and that's convert to default layer. So as I have the watercolor layer selected right now, I just say convert to default layer. And immediately you'll see the icon changes from that blue color to a white color. What that means is now, even though it's a watercolor layer, or at least it was a watercolor layer, and even though it still says watercolor layer, I can paint directly into that watercolor layer with that pencil, and it works exactly the way that we would expect it to. Same with the liquid ink layer. If I select that, and I come up here, and I come down here, and I say convert to default layer, now the icon changes from black to white, and even though it still says liquid ink layer, it's not a liquid ink layer any longer. And of course, I can paint right into that using our pencil tool. So, and of course, the reason why the color is coming out a little bit strange is because, of course, the watercolor is over the top of it with the gel mode, and it's blending. So, obviously, this showcases some of the strengths of working with layers and working with liquid ink layers and working with watercolor layers, because at any point in time, you can convert them to standard layers and work with them just like you would any other object layers using any of the other tools that are not specific to either the real watercolor, or liquid ink categories. Now, in addition to that, this menu here has some other options to look at. We have convert text to shape, we'll get to in another chapter, revert to original, group layers, ungroup layers, and collapse layers, which we'll get to in the next video, select all, deselect layer, duplicate layer, lock layer, and delete layer. This one is basically the same as using our trash can down here. Drop, drop all, drop and select. And then we have a bunch of layer mask commands, which we'll get to very soon. And then lift canvas to watercolor layer, wet entire watercolor layer, dry watercolor layer, diffuse watercolor layer, dry digital watercolor. We've already talked about all those. Show layer indicators. This is another one that's unique to this particular flyout menu. And if we click on this, what will happen is when we click over here to our layer adjuster, we'll see these little brackets appear around the layer. What that's basically telling us is that that's where that layer is. If I move that and drop that, you'll see there's a bracket there, a bracket there, a bracket there, and a bracket there. This is basically saying this is the bounding box of that layer. If I go ahead and I say hide layer indicators, you'll see those brackets disappear. Sometimes that can be useful, sometimes not. But again, that's one of those things that's sort of tucked away and hidden in this set of commands here. And of course, we have the no thumbnail, small thumbnail, medium thumbnail, and large thumbnail options as well. So obviously some slight differences. Now, why do I point this out, and why did I get so intensive into pointing that out to you? Well, the bottom line here is that Painter is a program that has a lot of things that are tucked away in context menus like these flyout menus. And so if you don't see something here in a regular menu, go ahead and check the flyout menu. It's not always the same stuff. And for that matter, if you come over here and you context click by right-clicking or context clicking with the Wacom button here, you'll see that we have the ability to switch quickly between our different layers because we're using the layer adjuster tool. However, if I come over here with the brush tool and I context click, you'll see that we get a bunch of brush specific context items, not the least of which is being able to switch quickly between our different variants. So like I say, look through your menus, pay attention to what's going on in the various different places where items can be stored, because Painter is a program that's notorious for hiding little goodies in places where if you don't look hard, you won't find them.